All right, our next guest, Pete Sepp. We haven't talked to Pete in a while. I'm looking forward to this conversation. He's president of the National Taxpayers Union, and he wants to make sure you go out to vote tomorrow because there are, I want to say 4, maybe 5 different state propositions involving taxes and how much you pay in taxes, including one that's a really big one, which would reduce your property taxes. Here to talk about it with us right now, Pete Sepp. Pete, how you been, buddy?
Doing well, thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. All right, so take us through here these propositions that are going to be on the Texas ballot tomorrow. The thing that drives me crazy about these is the way they're written, because they're written in legalese. They're not written in language that is easy for most voters to understand.
Yeah, plain language is not the thing that politicians want to use when describing most changes they want to make, either to tax laws or their constitutions. Now, fortunately in Texas, even if the language is a little complicated, most of the propositions voters will decide on tomorrow are actually going to have a positive impact on taxpayers' bottom lines. I mean, the biggest one, even bigger than the property tax changes over the long run, is a constitutional ban on any state-level taxes that would affect wealth or net worth, or on the difference between the assets and liabilities of an individual or a family. So we know that Texas has already constitutionally banned an income. Voters first in the 1990s said, well, you can't do it without our permission. So going forward, the legislature couldn't just impose it. They'd have to ask the voters first. 4 years ago, the voters got even tougher and said, no, the legislature can't even ask permission. It's now constitutionally prohibited. And this measure would add wealth taxes to that income tax ban.
So for those that would like to try to do an end run around income tax by calling it something else, that puts that kibosh on that as well.
Yeah, and it's a very real threat. Washington State, which currently has no income tax, just did something similar with a capital gains style tax to get around their income tax ban. So this is not something to take lightly. If you want an insurance policy, this measure provides it.
Okay. So which proposition is that one?
That's Proposition 3.
All right. So Proposition 3, you want to vote yes on Proposition 3. That's the other thing we have to be careful of on these things as well, because sometimes when you have the way these propositions are written, yes means no and no means yes. Do we have any of that this time around, or is it pretty straightforward?
Fortunately, it's straightforward in that respect. A yes vote on any of the 3 major propositions here on the ballot in Texas would have the effect of reducing someone's taxes or at least limiting tax increases.
Okay, let's go over these, though. You mentioned Proposition 3. Here's Proposition 2. It's a constitutional amendment authorizing a local option exemption from ad valorem taxation by a county or municipality of all or part of the appraised value of real property used to operate a child care facility. I guess what this means is that if this passes, then child care facilities could be property tax exempt.
Yes, that's exactly right, and that's a pretty narrow exemption, but the Texas laws and the Constitution, along with Florida's and a couple of other states, often have these kinds of property tax exemptions on the ballot. Some make it more broad-based, allow all businesses to take part in property tax relief, but it's hard to deny that this measure, as written, would reduce the property taxes for a narrow portion of businesses in the Texas economy.
I think maybe the thinking there is that if we can keep operating costs lower for child care facilities, number one, we'll have more of them, and number two, they won't have to charge quite as much as they do now.
Yes, and I guess a bonus would be that the state itself doesn't get more involved in providing that kind of care. We can't discount that anywhere, not even in Texas. Even in Texas, that someone wouldn't propose a public option for child care that's taxpayer funded.
All right, Proposition number 4. I love reading these things because it makes my eyes go cross. Proposition 4 is probably the one that most Texas voters are going to be the most concerned about. That's the constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to establish a temporary limit on the maximum appraised value of real property other than a resident homestead for ad valorem taxes imposed on the resident homesteads of the elderly or disabled to reflect increases in certain exemption amounts. Basically, I could keep on reading from this one, but basically this is about reducing property taxes, and that's what everybody's concerned about here in Texas.
Yes, and because Texas has wisely decided not to enact or adopt an income tax, they may very well decide at the polls, if the voters deem it fit, to ban a wealth tax. There's, of course, sales tax in Texas. That's kind of high for some, but the property tax is the ongoing controversy, and this amendment would elevate the homestead tax exemption and, as you say, empower the state legislature to cap yearly appraisal growth of non-homestead real estate. So it does something for just about every property taxpayer in the state.
You know, what's interesting to me is that this had to be done as part of a constitutional amendment, that this is something the state legislature couldn't just do itself. I'm not sure what it is about Texas law that makes it that way, but it's probably a good thing.
Well, yes, and probably the legislature wants to get the go-ahead from the voters through a constitutional amendment so that they have a clear mandate to say, okay, this is what happened at the polls. The voters have spoken. Now we have to get to work.
So, Pete Sepp, one thing I've always wondered, for our listeners who are getting at or close to Social Security age, there are states that exempt Social Security from state income taxes, even though they charge a state income tax otherwise. And there are other states that do charge a state income tax or make Social Security a part of taxable income. I'm a little surprised. I know there's a lot of these are blue states. But I'm a little surprised that the senior citizens in these states have not put up a bigger stink about having to pay property taxes on something they already paid taxes on to begin with.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. There are actually 11 states that tax Social Security benefits under their income tax systems. Colorado, Connecticut, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, Rhode Island, Utah, and Vermont. And so there are many states, red and blue, where Social Security benefits are taxable. I mean, in some cases, the states that exempt those kinds of Social Security tax payments are still not a good deal for seniors. I mean, if you were to live, for example, in Maryland or Virginia or California, which are exempting Social Security benefits from taxation, you'd still face, as a senior citizen, massive income tax burdens anyway on the rest of your income if you were lucky enough to make anything and keep it in a place like California. So it's not just Social Security benefit exemption from taxation. Seniors need to consider the whole package of tax policy in deciding where to go. And frankly, that's one reason why they tend to move south and west in the United States when they retire to places like Florida and Texas.
Well, that in winter.
Yes,
nobody likes winter when they get older. It seems to me, Pete Sepp, that we should reach a point in an age in this country where you are exempt from taxation. Period. When you taxes during the course of your lifetime, that you shouldn't have to pay any more taxes, and whether that's property taxes, income taxes, whatever it may be.
Well, when you think about it, the primary purpose of property taxes in most states remains public education. Sure, fire and police are there and other local services, but the bulk of property taxes in most states tends to go to the educational system. Well, by definition, someone who's retired probably doesn't have school-age children in the school system. I mean, that's a case to be made for a complete exemption, or at least a very big one, from property tax for seniors.
I haven't had any kids in public schools in 20 plus years at this point in time. I guess I don't mind up to a certain point helping other individuals send their kids to schools because, after all, the population is going down. The taxing population is going down. But by the same token, there should be a point in life where the taxes cease, so your expenses are cut back, so that if all you are living on is Social Security, at least you have a fighting chance.
Yeah, and especially in this era of inflation. I mean, we can go on, and the economists do here in Washington, D.C., go on and on about what the appropriate measure of inflation is. Well, really, to the average person, the appropriate measurement of inflation is how much more are they paying at the cash register for the things they need. Not a broad market basket, but how much is that carton of eggs or that gallon of gas or whatever you tend to care about. And most people will say the price has become way, way less affordable.
No, there's no doubt about it. I just spent over $400 at the grocery store and bought basically nothing. Or at least
Incredible.
very little. Yeah, it's amazing. I never
and
thought
they tell you it's getting better.
Yeah, no. It's not getting any better. We know that. Pete Sepp, good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for checking in. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Pete Sepp at the National Taxpayers Union. Back with more in a moment. Jim